Whispering Joe Biden's freaking people out with his low, murmuring, whispering ways. Is the reason he's whispering because he's got something to hide, like he keeps bombing the Middle East illegally?
People are waiting for relief. I got them $1.9 trillion relief so far.
That is a weird thing to do. I wonder why you would do that. I mean, let's face it, the story of Joe Biden is inextricably linked to the story of Donald Trump. Joe Biden is a response to Donald Trump. A lot of people really were into Donald Trump and thought that he brought a lot of messages into the mainstream that were kept out of the political landscape by the political establishment. Others think that Donald Trump is a peculiar anathema, a gargoyle in the world of politics. But Joe Biden will be defined by Trump. Trump is almost a necessary figure. Joe Biden's benevolence is a kind of a response to the perceived malevolence of Donald Trump. Depends, though, how you regard that situation. My position is a different one, in that I feel, as Glenn Greenwald writes about, that Joe Biden is continuing with policies in the Middle East that are there to support the military-industrial complex as a priority above the well-being of ordinary American people. Since he's been in office, Syria have been bombed twice and Iraq is being bombed now.
Now, the US military has conducted airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. The Pentagon has released a statement saying President Biden has been clear he will act to protect US personnel and deter such attacks.
The other thing for me that gets me on a personal level is the way that Joe Biden is exempt from the kind of criticism from the sort of shows that I kind of love, like, you know, like comedy shows that are late at night. I think those kind of things are cool, and I've found it a little bit uncomfortable the way that he is being exempted from criticism after the kind of endless critiques of Donald Trump. And in fact, in a more serious note, like that, there was some pretty heavy stuff that was ignored, like because, like, for example, the origins of the coronavirus. People were reluctant to say stuff about Wuhan and its origins in labs, for example, because it was regarded as a Trump narrative. So I feel like that the whole Biden presidency is a response to Donald Trump, and the attitudes around him are still being fashioned by that peculiar time in American political history.
I don't in any way dismiss what Senator Murphy says about the environment. Don't dismiss it at all. Just remind him, I wrote the bill on the environment.
I suppose what you don't want to do is judge Joe Biden simply for being old. But it is a kind of crazy way to carry on, isn't it? That craning in, that leaning in, whispering thing. Why is he doing that?
Asking me, well, you know, guess what? Employers can't find workers. I said, yeah, pay them more.
Do you know what I reckon this is really about? That mainstream politics has become so theatrical that theatrical behaviour has become an ordinary part of it. And it's easy to misjudge that when you find yourself in a rhetorical position or a performative position to sort of lean into dramatic ideas like performance and rendering information in strange ways. But it seems ill-judged because what Joe Biden was supposed to represent was a kind of a return to sort of professional grown-up politics after the perceived unusualness, let's call it, of Donald Trump. But the fact is that politics requires performance because it continually involves the veiling of truth. That's an important part of it. The management of information, the censorship of discourse, all of these things invite performance to the forefront. It means that politics cannot be transparent. You can't have someone go, yeah, we're doing this at the moment, we made a mistake with that, that shouldn't have happened, we're doing this because, look, down the line we think this. The whole thing becomes a kind of mad game because of a sort of self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating system where people observe, oh, this kind of thing works, don't tell people that, draw a veil over that. You know, like in the end you end up with something quite grotesque. Glenn Greenwald writes about some of the deeper stuff that's going on under Biden's presidency and talks about, in particular, American foreign policy. Obama's deployment of CIA operatives to Syria and years of the use of force to overthrow Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad never had any congressional approval of any kind, nor did Trump's bombing of Assad's forces, urged by Hillary Clinton who wanted more, nor does Biden's bombing campaign in Syria now. It was and is purely lawless illegal. And the same is true of bombing Iraq. Now, when politics is banalised into performance in the way that it appears to have been, we ignore, somehow we all consensually forget that there are important, vital geopolitical actions taking place that are shaping the future. Pre-pandemic, the relationship between Western secular nations and the Middle East were a priority because of the threat of terror, but now increasingly it looks like that the threat of terror was used in the same way that other global issues are used, to create a climate of fear that enables powerful governments to usher in new legislation that increase their power and diminish yours. So I suppose that while this is a really interesting, funny pop story about an odd, idiosyncratic bit of behaviour, I think it comes about precisely because of the fissure between truth and reality that politics requires. Elsewhere in his article, Greenwald says, having to watch the Bush, Cheney and Obama Biden operatives who ushered in this permanent state of illegality and lawless wars prance around during the Trump years as noble defenders of the sacred rule of law, all the while being celebrated and profiting greatly, was nauseating at the best of times. American elites do not care about the rule of law or the Constitution. Ignoring it is how they empower themselves at the expense of the citizenry. Wow, man, that's some harsh words there, but it seems to me to be true. Look around at the way that numerous stories are currently unfolding, Julian Assange, these specific stories, and you start to get a sense of what the function of government is. The function of government is separate from the stories we're told about government, and in the void between those two poles, peculiar performance abounds. Greenwald continues, whilst the ordinary American only suffers from all of this, there are definitely some sectors of US society which benefit. The corporation that Biden's Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin left in order to run the Pentagon, Raytheon, needs ongoing troop deployment and permanent warfare for its profitability. The only way that you could assure clarity of judgment and honour is to ensure that there's no conflict of interest in high office. When you have people with those kind of relationships, that kind of past, making those kind of decisions, it's pretty clear, isn't it, that there's a crossover. If you have a defence secretary who worked previously for a weapons manufacturer, do you think that there might be some complication? And of course there is. And I suppose what irks me in particular is the presentation of this government as somehow different. The way that the sort of celebrations after what was regarded as a kind of deposition of Trump. Well, I find it ridiculous, and I find it ridiculous because of facts, not because I've got some kind of axe to grind. General Austin's colleagues on the Raytheon board of directors, as well as his comrades on the boards of General Dynamics and Boeing, are surely thrilled with this attack. Do you think it would be a good law if no one could hold high office if they have those kind of relationships, no corporate relationships, and perhaps a sort of statute of limitations after you leave office, you can't for 10, 20, 30, maybe ever work for these big corporations? Can't you see how sort of open to exploitation and abuse this system is? It's not open to it, it's designed for it. Finally, Greenwald says, but what is beyond doubt is that this illegal, endless war in the Middle East does nothing but harm American citizens. That's true. More and more now, people are seeing that this is not a patriotic duty or some assertion of American independence or some right of ordinary people that benefits them, but a tremendous disadvantage. It's costly, and it allows systems that disadvantage them to continue to flourish while they suffer. As they are told they cannot enjoy sustainable, let alone quality standards of living without working 2 or 3 dreary hourly wage, benefits-free jobs for corporate giants, and while more and more Americans than ever continue to live at home and remain financially unable to start families, the US continues to spend more on its military than the next 13 countries combined. That seems like a odd economic setup unless you were planning to get in war with the next 12 countries combined and think, well, we've got to be ready for it. This has continued for close to 2 full decades now because the establishment wings of both parties support it. Neither of them believe in the Constitution or the rule of law, nor do they care in the slightest about the interests of anyone other than the large corporate sectors that fund the establishment wings of both parties. The bombs that fell on Syria and Iraq last night were for them and them alone. So perhaps the reason that Joe Biden's fallen into these theatrical habits is because politicians now are entertainers, actors, performers whose job it is to distract us from the reality of American interests or global interests. This is not a uniquely or particularly American problem. It's only exemplified greatly by America because they are the apex predator of the globe. So I suppose whilst this is a kind of funny, peculiar, curious little tale that we can all have a giggle on, that does expose that Biden isn't covered in anything like the critical way that Donald Trump was. The important thing is that it's business as usual for American business, and American business needs war. If you like this video, please like it, please subscribe to it. If you've got anything to say to us, comment in the comments below. Sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com, and importantly, if you want to listen to me have intense conversations where I learn about this stuff in detail from people who know the score, go over to Luminary or Apple Podcasts, and you can listen to my podcast anywhere in the world. And if you need to meditate after that, and God knows I do, you can also listen on the same channel, Luminary, to Above the Noise, my podcast. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Cheers.